Too Much Film School presents Public Domain Theater. Tonight's episode, His Girl Friday. Here's your hosts, Casey and Matt.
Hello, welcome to the stream.
Yes, welcome to Public Domain Theater. I'm Matt.
And I'm Casey. Today we're going to be
Today we're watching His Girl Friday, which is a movie that's been in the public domain for longer than most of us have been alive. About 60 years, I believe. It was sometime in the mid 60s when Columbia forgot to refile their copyright claim. Casey is just checking some stats to make sure that we're actually streaming and everything is working the way that's supposed to be. But His Girl Friday is a classic of the screwball comedy genre. It didn't technically invent it, but it is one of the best early examples. And if you like that kind of rom-com where people talk really quickly and everybody's fast and funny, His Girl Friday is a model or a template for those.
It's quintessential, I think, for it. So Aaron Sorkin's writing wouldn't exist without His Girl Friday. I think Quentin Tarantino said that it's one of his favorite movies, and even Gilmore Girls, again, the witty repartee and like very dense, fast back and forth. Definitely owes homage to this.
Yeah, so if you haven't seen it, we are going to be talking about spoilers and stuff. Although the plot is not really the most important thing about this movie, it is much more about the character and the funny comedy. But if you haven't seen it, we do recommend you watch it first. It is, as always, a movie that's in the public domain, so it's easily found anywhere. We'll link it in the description to a YouTube channel. But I would actually recommend to anybody, if you are looking for it, look up if your library has Canopy. Canopy spelled with a K. They always have the best quality picture and sound for all of these old public domain films. If you watch it on Amazon, it's a very low quality print. YouTube channels are sort of hit or miss as to whether you have a good one or not. Canopy is almost always going to be your best bet if you have access to it. A lot of public libraries do it, or universities if you're a student. So you should definitely check it out. But we'll link the best version that we can find on YouTube in the description when we're done today. But if you have seen it, then you'll enjoy some of the background and some of the discussion that we have about the making of and the artistic quality of this, as well as its social and cultural significance. So let's, what do you think, Casey? Should we get started?
Yeah, we can go ahead and kick it off. And actually talking about, it did come from a play called The Front Page, and was actually already a movie in 1931 called The Front Page, and then they remade it in this version in 1940. But we'll go ahead and get started.
Here we go. So as I alluded to before, Columbia is the production company. They owned the copyright when the film was made. You can actually see the little MCMM. I don't know what the Roman numerals are, but you know what I mean. The issue was, at the time, originally the way copyright worked is that you would have a copyright for about, I think it was 20 years. Make me if I'm wrong, Casey. But you had to then renew your copyright, and Columbia just forgot to for some reason. And it was a bureaucratic fell through the cracks kind of thing. And so the movie entered the public domain in the 1960s. And at the time, it was a successful movie at the time, but it wasn't necessarily like the most important film the way that it is now, considered one of Tarantino's favorites, that sort of thing. What happened was, interestingly, the fact that it entered the public domain is what helped it. Because in the mid 60s, the French film theorists who all wrote for Cahiers du Cinema started to reevaluate the American filmmakers. In particular, Hitchcock is sort of the most famous example of who they declared an auteur. But there was also Howard Hawks. There was some debate around whether he qualified as somebody who had a vision and that sort of thing. Because His Girl Friday was so widely available due to the lack of copyright and being in the public domain, there's copies of it everywhere. And television stations would play it because they didn't have to pay royalties and all of that stuff. So it was really easy to find. And when the film theorists started reevaluating Howard Hawks, this became an example that everybody could point to, everybody was familiar with, and everybody could say, "Oh wait, this actually is a really good movie," which is why we're discussing it now. But it
Yeah,
probably would not have its place in film history if not for the the guy in the copyright office at Columbia forgetting to file his paperwork,
they
in
didn't have
1960.
Outlook reminders back then, so I don't know how they got anything done. But I will say, yeah, a similar. It's another interesting examination because again, they made a movie of the front page in 1931. This is only 1940. Now we say, oh, why are they remaking Highlander or anything that came out only 20 years ago? They didn't have a way to watch on DVD or VHS or anything then. So if something was popular in 31, it went away and was out of theaters. They didn't make any more money. They could re-release the print, but more technology had advanced by that time, and 9 years was huge. So they're like, let's redo it. It was originally under United Artists, actually, with Howard Hughes
Yeah.
producing, and then this one remade with Columbia, Howard Hawks. But Ben Hecht was the playwright, and he wrote both versions. They do share some of the same actors actually in both these versions. So it's an interesting to watch them compared to each other because this one, again, not just the copyright free, but the performances, the directing, everything is, in my opinion, much better than the front page from 1931. And even the opening, we can see the differences. We
Yeah.
just walked through a bustling bullpen that showed people shouting back and forth, where's that copy? Get this. We're now in the chief editor's office. He's talking about let's lean on the governor to try and get this execution mainstay delayed. But we start with these smart people pattering back and forth, clever quips with these two, instantly endear us to it. The 1931 front page starts instead with the prison guards testing the gallows, and they're not even dressed like guards. They're just testing that the trapdoor works. And then a whiskey bottle shatters by them, and we go up to the press room, and they're like, keep it down up there. And they are these drunk, surly, gross guys just hanging out in a room eating old food, waiting for a story, making lewd comments. So in this, we start with these debonair, well-dressed people that seem to be the smartest in the room. And again, thinking of Aaron Sorkin and all the, not network, the newsroom or whatever with Jeff Daniels now, definitely using this as an influence. This version, compared to the front page, shows the difference and what Howard Hawks kind of brings to this version.
Yeah, I had never seen the front page until it was time to do research for this live stream. And I had heard some good things about it, and there's Criterion has a double disc copy of front page and His Girl Friday together. And yeah, I was so disappointed in the front page. Part of it was a technical issue. 1931, the sound had only become common a couple of years before, and they were still figuring out what the rules were, what you could technically do. The camera in the front page moves a little bit more than most films of the time, but it's still pretty restricted because cameras were huge. They made a lot of noise,
It's
and
also
the
jerky.
microphones were not great. Sorry, go ahead.
I was surprised with how many movements they had in the front page. They had dolly shots, but they would bump into things. And I'm like, that's in the final print. Like, you went with that one. Okay. But it was new and novel at the time. So they're trying it out, but it shows a lot of those bumps. And by 1940, they had figured a lot of that out and gotten a lot better. So,
Yeah, 1940, everything pretty much looks like, other than being black and white, pretty much how we expect movies to look and sound and feel. And in fact, in particular, the sound is interesting because the dialogue is so fast that they're talking on top of each other. In 1931, it was not clear to the filmmakers if they could do that, if the audience would be able to follow the dialogue, because they've never done it before. Like, they were inventing this new thing. And so by now, by 1940, they got everything they got it figured out. They've made a million of these movies by this point. So Howard Hawks is challenging himself to accelerate the pace of the dialogue. What's interesting, one thing about the pace of things is both movies are about 90 minutes. There's more plots going on in His Girl Friday because they had this whole romance that wasn't there in front page, and yet they still fit it into the same movie because they're talking so much faster.
Yeah, that's one important part that I'll point out is in the original play, Front Page, and the 1931 movie version, Hildy's a man. It's not a romantic comedy. It's two newspapermen, again, battling the chief editor and his star reporter who wants to leave the business to get married. The plot's the same. There's just a gender swap. And I remember in film school even thinking, oh, wow, that's progressive for the time that they'd make a woman equal to, Cary Grant's character here, Walter. And she, as it looms large in our culture for her, Hildy Johnson here, as portrayed by Rosalind Russell, is used for a lot of other models for strong female characters because she keeps up with Cary Grant's character. But in the original, it was a man, and they were just fighting over him wanting him to keep working. So bringing the romance into it, I think, also catapulted this ahead of, because even in this scene, we can see that she is equal to him. They're both brilliant at what they do, and she can keep pace with him. And that's, I think, why, again, the romance works, is he respects her, and she can keep up with him. So I think that's what makes her such a strong character. But again,
as
Front
the
Page had it. They were much more acerbic. They were very bitter and a lot more negative towards each other.
as the studio system advanced, they started to realize that there was an appeal to having two different storylines happening at the same time so that it kept the audience engaged, but it also sort of added a layer of interest to almost every line of dialogue. So everything that Cary Grant is doing serves two purposes. One, get his star reporter back, and two, win his wife back. And the whole time, you're never entirely sure if it's one thing or the other. I believe, like, ultimately it's both. And I think, like you said, he has a respect for her that may not have been as common in other films at the time. And actually I feel like makes the romance stronger. But in the Front Page, it's just one plot. It's just we're trying to get the guy to come back and leave his wife, which is kind of a shitty thing to do. Like,
I will say, Walter Burns in the Front Page is completely unlikable, whereas Cary Grant's Walter Burns is a rogue who's likable, but he's detestable in some of the things he's doing. And I will say, even we talked about, Aaron Sorkin or Gilmore Girls or things that are influenced by this. I would say like Mad Men, Breaking Bad, all have Sopranos had a whole, premiere television era of the past 20 years of unlikable characters that we respect of their brilliance, kind of, again, Mad Men, and just saying he's the best admin. He's cheating on his wife. He's doing everything. He's underhanded, but damn, I respect him. And I will say that Cary Grant brought a lot of that, but was still a lovable rogue. Whereas, by the time we got to Breaking Bad and these things are like, oh, nobody loves this person, but he's pretty brilliant, so I have to watch.
there's something where I think a lot of young filmmakers, or a lot of people who are trying to be, I don't want to be insulting when I say this, but like who want to be edgy or different, they'll insist that a character doesn't have to be likable to be the main character. And I think that's strictly speaking true, but all of those characters that you mentioned have something admirable about them. And whether it's how smart they are, how hardworking they are, how, diligent they are, there's a lot of things to like about them, even if we know ultimately they're a bad person, and we wouldn't actually want to be friends with them, but we're interested in watching them.
Yep.
That's something that you'll find younger people, or sort of maybe like independent minded films, will try and say, no, it's fine for my character to be awful. They can be at their core awful, but they still need a certain amount of, there needs to be some reason to watch this movie.
Right.
And Cary Grant he's obviously on the way lighter end of this. He's a lovable rogue, and the guy in Breaking Bad is a terrible person, but part of it is just like the how smart he is, and how fast he is on his feet to get out of whatever particular problem he's in. Yeah, and so we don't like him, but we like watching him, and I think that gets lost in certain kinds of films and television shows, and that's why they end up getting forgotten. Whereas, again, somewhere on the scale from His Girl Friday to Breaking Bad, they get remembered forever because even though they're not great people, there's something about them that we want to see.
Yes. And I will say that other thing that we've seen in this scene right now is he's calculating right now. He asked her, "Oh, what's his name?" He's going to use each of these as weapons to try and get what he wants. He fielded a phone call right when you were saying, "Oh, he's got to serve two purposes," and it's his editor outside, and he's pretending it's one of his reporters saying, "You can't do this to me now. What are you doing having a baby?" Completely lying to try and entrap her or plant a seed that he's going to call back on in the next scene. So the other thing I was going to say with this scene is you mentioned Howard Hawks and him not being as big a director as, say, Hitchcock, but this film helping bring him up in the view of a lot of film theorists and things. Seeing the staging of this one, when she first walks in, he's got his back to her. He's showing indifference.
Right.
He turns to her and then again lights the match for her. And at different times, she's standing while he's sitting looking at her. And again, just the power dynamic is influenced by their size on the screen, which is something that Hitchcock did. You know, Vertigo has amazing scenes where Scotty is talking and telling story. And again, you can tell the power dynamic shifts when who is smaller in the frame, who is closer. And that scene had a lot of the same directorial language. In their battle of wits, it was represented visually.
Yeah. And it's also another part of that kind of staging that you might miss as you're watching it is how unnatural all of it is, where they're facing the same direction towards camera, where on set you would say open yourself out to camera. Nobody would actually have the conversation that way. Like it's totally unnatural, and yet because the actors sell it and because we want to see both of them, we can see those interactions without resorting to over the shoulder shots and just cutting on every line of dialogue, which is what they do nowadays.
Yeah.
And so it is entirely unnatural, entirely artificial, and yet you don't realize that as you're watching it. And that's part of like the magic of that style of filmmaking. And Howard Hawks is one of the best at that.
No, I will also say this, we talked about it coming from a play, but this scene that's going on right now where he pretends that he thinks the old man is Ralph Bellamy's character and the fiance sets him up as a patsy and kind of just ignores him pretending that Cary Grant's character is the one confused to just highlight how indifferent he is towards Ralph Bellamy, that he could consider the old man him. But he then, again, even does a visual gag of shaking the hands with the umbrella. And this whole scene reminds me of actually the Marx Brothers and a lot of things that would, there was, who again had their own dialogue-based comedy, witty patter and things at the time. But the staging and blocking owes itself not just to theater, but kind of vaudeville, which would have been within 20 years. But again, even the characters using the power dynamic of he just sat next to this guy's fiance, his ex-wife, and said, "No, you sit over there. Sorry, my mistake." But everything is a chess move. It feels like to Walter.
Yeah, this is what a director actually contributes to a movie, and it's a thing that actually has honestly been like forgotten. So often people talk about a director's vision and stuff, and the director talks about art direction and camera angles and the sound design and like everything except for this. And the staging, and I hate to use the fancy, French film school term, but this is actually what mise en scène is saying, where are the actors in relation to the camera? And what does that say about how everybody relates to each other? And there's no one else on set who can do that. It's not the cameraman's job to tell the actors where to stand. The set designer can make a table, but he can't tell the actors where to sit at the table. And the problem for the actors is while they're supposed to create a sense of reality and live in the moments, they don't know what they look like on camera. It's even with the modern technology of playback, which Jerry Lewis invented so that he could watch himself. He could still only watch himself after the fact. So the only person who can actually say, I see who's important in this scene, I see what they're thinking, and I see where the audience is looking and why, The only person who can do that is the director. And so many directors nowadays sort of forego all of that. And they say, oh, we're having a dialogue scene, close up on him, close up on her, get a two
Yeah,
shot, and we'll figure it out in post. And
I will
it's
just say that
they're not actually directing anything. They're getting footage to
they're
put
doing
together later.
coverage.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're getting
for
covered.
editing. I will say that Ralph Bellamy's character was just talking about their engagement, his life in Albany. He was in over his shoulder. Cary Grant is center, and his eyes are darting back and forth with his brow cast down like a fiendish fox plotting. And he's the center of attention while Ralph Bellamy is talking.
Yes. Yeah, and it's I do feel bad, not for Ralph Bellamy, the actor. He's got a job and whatever. He's doing a good job.
He
But I
acted for
feel
about
bad
60
for the
years, by the way.
character. What's that?
He acted for like 60 years. People our age will remember him from what? Trading Places.
Yeah, yeah.
He and Mortimer, the two old guys. So that was Ralph Bellamy. But he
Uh,
was in movies like this for, again, 40 years before that. And then he was in, again, My God, with George Burns and a lot of things. When I was young, I remember seeing him pop up. And then I saw this. I went, oh my God, that's him when he was young. But so he had a great run. And I will say, even character actors like this fact that it was the front page and then became this, the man to be executed is the same actor. And actually, looking at movies that were remade, there was a film called Holiday that I think made in 1930 and then again in 38, and it used again some of the same cast, one of whom was a character actor that was in the front page as the press,
oh, okay.
the journalist who hated germs. You would know him if you saw him. He's a prissy butler or pearl clutching uncle at a wedding for all the
Right, right.
original like silent black and white films. And he worked for, again, I looked it up, like 40 years straight in these character acting pieces. So Ralph Bellamy's fine, and this film illustrates that doing a character bit like the well-meaning buffoon of a fiance will get you work forever. Versus, I looked at the main characters from the first Holiday or from front page, and I'm like, oh, as a star, they worked for 5 years, which you could make 20 movies in that time in the studio system in the golden age. But then they went away. Versus character acting was like a bread and butter for decades.
Oh yeah, it's so yeah. He kept around, and Cary Grant sort of he's the handsome leading man. Well, at a certain point, he's too old to play the handsome leading man, and like, what do you do with him?
What, Roman Holiday? I think he was definitely too old to be courting Audrey Hepburn, but they wouldn't let it go.
Yeah, but going back to the film, the character that Ralph Bellamy plays, I always feel so bad for him, and this is sort of the problem with any story where there is a romantic couple or they're currently a romantic couple, and there's a third party who's trying to break them up in order to be with one of them, and it almost you almost always like this happens in like Liar Liar. It happens in I mean, they did it in even like Superman Returns. Like there's you always just feel bad for that guy if he's not the tricky situation for the writer is if that guy that the woman is currently with, usually it's like the woman, but whatever, whichever way it worked, that third party, if he's a bad guy, then you're like, well, why is she with him in the first place? But if he's a decent guy, then you kind of feel bad for him that he gets dumped for Cary Grant.
Yeah.
Although, of course, you understand why he gets dumped for Cary Grant. But like, it's hard to not feel bad for him. And
I will say,
there's no real good solution to it except for, I think Enchanted did it, where there's the prince and the cartoon prince and princess. Both of them found another person to be with, and that kind of solves is if instead of being a love triangle, it's like a quadrilateral.
Yeah.
So that everybody gets a happy ending. You don't feel bad for the person who gets dumped. Otherwise, it's just like poor Ralph Bellamy.
I will say that they set him up as much as Cary Grant's Walter Burns is a lovable rogue. They set Ralph Bellamy up as the sad sack buffoon. And again, we've referenced Enchanted, which again has animated parts. Vashti in the comments said, "Oh, this reminds me of Looney Tunes." This movie has some two-dimensional characterizations. These are larger than life. When we get to the sheriff and the governor or mayor, like they are cartoon characters representation of different things. So it fits, and again, as much as we feel bad for him, we're set up that way
Yeah,
by
yeah.
the character. And so I think I'm fine with it, but it's a fantastical world that they kind of create. I will correct myself. I said Roman Holiday. Cary Grant turned down Roman Holiday because he felt he was too old to play the love interest. So it's Gregory
Oh,
Peck. And then he was in Charade with Audrey
that's
Hepburn
yeah,
later. And again, still 30 years difference of
yeah,
age. And it was creepy. But
yeah. Yeah. Um,
I
yeah.
will say that this scene just happened of he's been saying Sweeney, the call he answered and made up that one of his reporters just had a baby. And now he's saying, oh, it's twins. You have to cover the story. She's like, wait a minute. He was only married 4 months ago. Of course, they couldn't have had kids out of wedlock. So you're making up this baby. And he said, you got me. And she's like, oh, you. Ralph Bellamy's the last horse across the finish line. Like, wait, what? But it shows that she's as good as him and can catch him in his lies and goes, oh, that's the way he does it. So
I like
now
that.
it finally becomes about money. He's like, fine, I'll pay you to write it. I'll give you $1,000.
I do like the traditional assumption that there's no way that these children could have been. It's very wholesome.
Exactly.
What
I
what
forget. I think
there's
just the code was around and they would have had to sign off on this film, but they would not have allowed it to say, yeah,
yeah.
he's only been married 4 months. He's having twins.
And sometimes though I enjoy the code films that because there's still sexual innuendo and stuff that they are it's not an accident like it's not a pun that they accidentally came across or anything like
Right.
he's
They're
like
having to
at the
be
very
clever
beginning
to
he
fit it in.
says how long is it and she's like how long is what
Oh,
how
I
long is
will
it since
say,
you've seen each other like
yeah,
and so the audience definitely knew but it
yeah,
goes over the heads of like the kids who were with the
the
family
clutching the
and
pearls won't someone think of the children. Uh,
but but what I'm
but
saying is that it's harmless to the kids because they don't know,
right,
and it's fun for the adults to sort of piece it together rather than just sort of outright stating things.
yeah,
And
having the
so,
restrictions made them be more clever. And I will say
yeah,
in
yeah,
that original scene we were talking about when she first walks in, she says, "Aren't you going to offer me a seat or something?" He slaps his knee and says, "Right here, I've been keeping it warm for you," or and
yeah, yeah, something like that. Yeah.
but
That
there's
was less
definitely,
subtle,
I mean, again, agreed.
but
But
yeah.
here's the same scene I was talking about in the front page. This
Oh yeah,
leads
this is
off.
like the beginning of the front
they
page.
they redo their the scripts could be the same between these movies. It's just the staging, editing, and a lot of the dialogue that they punch up. So I think this is better for having the front page being made because they were able to add on, an extra 20% of wit in all of the. Oh, I will say this part's also interesting in the view of the film or what they're portraying, because they are discussing that these are different reporters for different papers, and the one in the back I think is for the Tribune. He's giving facts for a story to his editor to print, and this guy's just listening, copying what he says, but adding his own paper spin on it.
Yeah, it's the film is very cynical about the the nature of news because Ben Hecht and his co-writer Charles Lederer they worked in the newspaper
Yeah,
business before they started writing plays and then so Ben Hecht actually like sort of went around the country. He's from Chicago. He grew up there. And
yeah.
so a lot of the I don't think they actually specify the city in this, but it's
It,
Chicago
it's Chicago,
in
and
his
I think
mind.
front page is more explicit about it. But
Okay.
this is
And
definitely,
then he went to New York to become a playwright and he wrote this play based on his news time in Chicago. He wrote the play in New York, and it was this time period right when Broadway started to become what we think of Broadway, as opposed to just there's a bunch of theaters. Like it's when he got to Broadway, it was right when Broadway became this institution. Then he sells in the 1930s. He sells the script to UA, and then Columbia comes to him to remake it. He's not actually credited on this, but he did help write
yeah.
the screenplay. So
No,
he goes out to Hollywood. So he goes from Chicago in the middle out east to New York, and then goes west to LA. And so he's very worldly, at least like within the confines of the United States, which is a very large
I will
country.
say he was a foreign correspondent for World War One as a newspaperman. So he had international war, and then the Chicago crime beat he was on, what you were mentioning in his newspaper, was Al Capone's time. It was the 1920s
Right.
in Chicago, bootlegging. So he saw a lot of shit go down and brought that to his writing. And I will say, yeah, I don't know if you were going to cover, he then went on to Hollywood to participate in some famous writings.
Yeah. Do you have that the telegram?
Yeah, it was Herman Mankiewicz. If you've seen the Fincher movie Mank, it's about him. And Ben Hecht is actually the one in the movie that gets a telegram that says, "Come, you have to come
Mankiewicz
on out."
wrote Citizen Kane.
Right. So, will you accept 300 per week to work for Paramount Pictures? All expenses paid. The 300 is peanuts. Millions are to be grabbed out here, and your only competition is idiots. Don't let this get around. In the movie Mank, we see him walking up with a telegram, and then he talks to Herman Mankiewicz's brother Joe. He's like, "Yeah, he sent about 12 of those telegrams to every playwright in the East Coast. Like, get in the room." And they all just sit in there drinking and coming up with ideas that they can pitch to studios. But
Yeah, and it does reflect honestly what Ben Hecht thought of it. And the irony of Ben Hecht's whole career is he wanted to be a great novelist. And so he regarded novels as sort of like peak writing because the author has complete control and whatever. And then plays were below that, and then movies were below that. And movies he could write. He was sort of one of those famously fast writers, like he could write a movie in a weekend kind of guy. And so he just sort of threw these things out, and he didn't regard them as important. And yet nobody remembers his novels. None of them were significant. His plays are largely remembered for being adapted into movies. And he's one of the most important figures in early 20th century cinema for his work with Howard Hawks and Hitchcock and a lot of like sort of the best directors. He was one of the best writers for some of the best directors. And he didn't care.
No, I
He
will
did
say
not care about any of this. And he was one of the greatest.
I would say again, I mentioned Al Capone. He wrote Scarface, not the 80s one, the original one. Notorious, he was uncredited on, but script doctor, Gone with the Wind, foreign correspondent. Again, some of the greatest, and again, Academy Award winning ones.
Yeah, and deservedly so. And it's as the so it as we were talking earlier about the way the French Cahiers de Cinema guys rethought about the 30s and 40s studio system. The guys and they admired them and said these are auteurs and they're making like great high art. The people at the time didn't think of it that way. They thought of it as a job. And
Yeah.
in the case of the writers, they often thought of it as we're overpaid, but we'll take it because these guys are suckers.
Yeah.
And
we're fleecing them.
And so they're and you see this a lot in a lot of early 20th century art, like comic book artists and writers had similar attitude where in the 80s, the great comic writers of the 80s like Frank Miller and stuff, they would regard the earlier generation as geniuses, and those guys were like, I needed a paycheck.
Yeah.
And you kind of wonder, like, is there something like that that's happening right now, whether it's YouTube or video games or whatever? Is there this hey, I'm just doing my job, and then a generation hence we're going to realize, oh, these people are geniuses and inventing a new art form, and we didn't know it as we lived through it. And I wonder how often that's happened. Like, did you know yeah, I don't know. Like,
I think
does this happen a lot? Did Shakespeare know he was Shakespeare?
No, and I'll say that, yeah, again, it wasn't George Millet that was working and penniless in selling newspapers in a train station and was discovered late in life. And so I'd say that now technology and culture moves fast enough that if something's popular, the person probably still alive, and video games have this one from 20 years ago. Oh my God, this is very often Ken Levine or the Naughty Dog people that are like, oh, Last of Us 2 is the height of video games and everything. the people that were working at Naughty Dog are still there, and then everyone gets big
That's
heads,
true.
and everything gets amplified and says they can't miss, and a lot of times that leads to misses. But I think creative industries move faster now, and they change their focus to, hey, this worked, even if it was 10 years ago. Throw more money at it, pump it up, and make it bigger. And as much as this is, we just talked about the second making of this movie, there's a third, and then they did a 1974 version with Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon.
Yeah.
They changed Hildy back to a man. But I will say, so people keep trying to strike the iron again and again, and now I think industries have just shortened the time frame on when they want to do it.
That is
Remakes aside.
interesting. Yeah. Yeah, because there are video games that I think people do, like Last of Us and stuff that I think
Bioshock
we're now at
again.
the point where we regard them as art, even though I think there are people that don't, but I think they're just wrong.
Right.
uh,
And again, even things like Fallout, a lot of the Bethesda games. And then again, they made Starfield, which people are like, this isn't as good as your old stuff. It costs balloon, a lot of things happen. And then you're like, is it the ship of Theseus? The same studio's making it, but maybe different creative directors, or the creative director left and founded their own studio, but they're working with brand new people, and they'll put out competing games, and both of them don't capture the magic of the original. But
yeah, it's we often that the ship of Theseus point is interesting because we often think of we're a lot of times trained to think of like a singular artist as again having the vision being the auteur, and that central figure, like Howard Hawks in this case, is often very important. They are a central figure, but also the system around them is also important, and what that contributes is sometimes less visible. A video game example is Left 4 Dead. Excuse me. Left 4 Dead is actually still regarded as, or Left 4 Dead 2 usually, is still regarded as one of the best video games and is still played popularly today. The core team went off and left Valve, the production company,
yeah, Turtle
and
Rock
made
Studios.
what's that?
Turtle Rock Studios.
Yeah, so they made a separate company and released a game called Back for Blood or something, and it was
It's,
terrible, and
it was a
nobody
spiritual
remembers it.
successor. Yeah.
Yeah, and everybody's still like, let's play Left 4 Dead 2. So there was something about those guys from Turtle Rock and Valve being the sort of structure around them. And like a guy like Howard Hawks, I don't know how well he does without Columbia. Columbia
Yeah.
was not, they didn't have a ton of money. They weren't the biggest studio. Sometimes stuff was cheap. There was a scene that we were talking about earlier, the restaurant scene, for example. If you watch closely, you'll notice there's only one wall on the set. So
Yep.
the over the shoulder angles that they have never quite go all the way from Rosalind Russell to Ralph Bellamy because there's no wall on either side of it. There's just the back wall and the bar. The characters walk in from the back, they come and sit down at this table, and the three of them sit around the table, and that's the whole scene. And
Yep.
you can see the waiter in the background, like you said, where they set up the phone call and all of that stuff. All of that stuff essentially happens from roughly the same angle because for a combination of things. So the part of it is the studio says, how cheap can we make this set if we don't build other wall, if we only build one
Yep.
wall instead of three, and have fewer extras and everything that goes along with that. That saves money. But also you've got Howard Hawks saying, okay, if we do that, if we can bring them in and we can stage in depth where we're seeing the waiter in the background while they're having
Yep.
the conversation in the boardroom, or the stuff that you were talking about where we're looking at the back of Ralph Bellamy's head while he's talking about stuff, and we're paying attention to Cary Grant and listening to Ralph Bellamy. Like all of those things happen together because of both the artist and the system, the
Yep.
artist working within the system. Whereas if he had, infinite money or whatever, maybe the movie wouldn't have turned out as well. Maybe
True.
he wouldn't have
They
been
would have
as
gone
creative with
on
what he.
location to Chicago or places. This
Right, right.
scene that's going on right now is another example of that. We're seeing the press room at the prison from essentially one angle the whole time. But they've built stairs that are out a window, and they just had a little nod to it of calling one of the guy, "Hey, Stairway Sam." He's looking out the window as women are going up and down the stairs to try and see up their skirts. So again, these are some base men. But we get that out the window, and then we have the stairs coming up out the door. So it creates this dynamic depth in essentially a 35 millimeter, frame of 30 degrees that they can just cover like this. So it creates a lot of dynamics. And I do think it's like you're saying, the studio system was the dream factory. This is in the golden age. And they were cranking out movies. Again, this one, Cary Grant made, I think, 6 other movies this 1940 released with him in it. So
Really?
they were just cranking out movies.
Oh,
You were
yeah.
saying Ben Hecht could write a movie in a weekend. The studio would shoot it in 2 weeks. So the set dressings, everything was ready to go. And even though they were, like you were saying, the writers were kind of tradespeople or craftsmen just doing it for a job. So were everyone making sets. And this was the time when it was the most well-oiled machine. And I think that's what struck the sweet spot with this as well. They iterated on the script and a lot of the things in it from the 31 movie. But it also hit at a time where they could get the lighting down, the staging, give depth to sets, and really allow things like the performance, the writing, which had been fine, and the directing to shine.
Yeah.
But I will say one other thing. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say this part also really lowers my opinion of the press people, because this is Molly Malloy, who's the love interest of the man to be executed, even though she said she only met him once, the day before the shooting. And he was in the park and it was raining, and she let him come to his place to dry off. And then the next morning he ended up with a gun and shot a colored policeman, and now he's to be executed. And they wrote all these stories about her and their love nest, and that she's pledged herself to him. And she's like, I only met him once. Why are you guys printing these lies? And they're like, oh, they're warming up the gallows for your boyfriend. But look at their faces while they're doing this. She's breaking down, and they're like, it's just my job, and it sells papers if you're in love. But watch the man with the hat. They were just chatting, joking. He pulls the hat down over his eyes. At first, this was going on. I'm like, see, these are the same assholes from the front page, the 1931. But then we get this moment where they're no longer talking. They stop their card game, and that guy's hiding his eye. They're ashamed of what they've done. And they're ashamed of what they feel they have to do for this job. So, sorry, that was just one bit of, again, a lot of the elements, the directing, the acting, and the business brought that feeling that wasn't there in the 1931 movie.
Absolutely. It adds depth to all of these guys. Like, you think they are cold-hearted and they are doing awful things in the way that they're reporting, but it also is wearing down on them. And you said that they are one-dimensional characters, and that's true for each one of them, but collectively we can see them as the press, as a character. And we also see why Rosalind Russell, why she's different from them, because she's the one who actually who expresses sympathy and comforts Molly Malloy, and is some of that is, I actually don't recall how it worked in the front page, but some of that is honestly just she's a woman and is able to have sympathy in a way that they can't have, and that's why true. She's better at it than they are.
It could be, or she's newer in it. She hasn't worn down to the accepting it. But the scene prior to this was her interviewing Earl, and he is saying, "Oh, I don't know why I did," and she's feeding him a story of like, "Oh, maybe you listen to these people in the park about production for use and communism," and so he's like, "Yeah, that's it." So she's writing a story that she fabricated and told him what to say. So she's, again, not better than these guys, but agreed that she feels more bad about it maybe, or expresses that, and it does allow her to do that as a woman. Also, though, we were talking about two-dimensional characters. This is the sheriff. First time we saw him is she steps on his toe when she's running out the door, and now these guys just gather around and make fun of him, and he looks like Droopy, the dog, and so he's
Droopy.
In no way
you shouldn't insult Droopy that way. Droopy is much
again.
Yeah, but it does fit sort of the overall cynicism of the movie. It doesn't like the press. It also doesn't like politics. Honestly, Ralph Bellamy, while he is a little bit of a sad sack, is a decent guy. And he's arguably the only good guy in the movie, and he keeps getting screwed over and over
also
again.
Good guys are apparently idiots. The only reason you're good is because you're so dumb that you can't see the angles to benefit yourself. I will say we get maybe the the governor's cousin comes to deliver a note later, and he seems good and even dumber than Ralph Bellamy here. But I will say this also, chickens come to roost of he was just in jail for having stole a watch off Diamond Louie, the street tough that we see in Cary Grant's
Yeah.
office. And again, he's missing that. And she had told him, Cary Grant said, "Oh, I'll give you guys a certified check if you do this one story. It'll only take 2 hours." He gave Bruce the check, and she's like, "Oh, it's an old newspaper person trick. Put the check in your hat. Your first big payday, you put it in the lining of your hat." And now he again finds his wallet missing. He got a watch plan on that they say he stole, but the check is safe in his hat. Like the whole time, Cary Grant's like, "I'm going to get that check back. I can put it out there, but it's just bait." And she saw it coming, and again has been countering him. They're chess masters, brilliant strategy and facing off, and that's what this movie is all about.
Yeah, the I almost I feel like your characterization of Bellamy being an idiot. I I feel like that's still too. The governor's cousin is clearly dumb, but I feel like Ralph Bellamy is more innocent than dumb. That he just
Yes.
doesn't think he
The
doesn't think
way that
anybody's out to get him. Which actually, being an insurance talent is maybe a mistake because as an insurance in insurance, people are constantly trying to. Uh,
anticipate risks.
yeah, well, no, more than that. People try to commit insurance fraud, and that's
Yep.
why insurance investigators exist to make sure that you're
Double
actually
Indemnity.
right.
Great film.
Is the I was just thinking that like how cynical he is because people are constantly trying to. I mean, obviously, people will have negative thoughts about insurance companies and the way insurance companies try to screw people over. That's definitely true, but the opposite also happens. People try to screw over insurance companies and claim stuff that doesn't happen. And so it's a little weird. I guess he's a salesman and not an adjuster. And so like, or an investigator. So like
Right.
he's not, it's not his job necessarily to know whether people are trying to cheat the company, but it is odd that he doesn't have that sense
He's
of
not
risk. Like I
savvy.
wonder, yeah, I wonder if there might have been a better job because I think in their mind, insurance salesman is just boring, and that was
Yeah.
all that the character needed to be. And I wonder if there might have been a better choice than that particular job because when you think about it, it kind of doesn't work quite as well
I
as
mean,
maybe it ought to.
I will say everyone aside from these people are unqualified for their job. The sheriff we see, the mayor, the governor's cousin. So Ralph Bellamy being in that, this doctor who's here to examine the but I will say even the scene that we just saw of she figured out that Cary Grant was trying to double cross her, got Ralph Bellamy sent to jail. She just called him and said, "I quit. I'm tearing up the story. I got your check." Essentially, nah, nah, nah. You tried to outdo me, but now I'm screwing you over. Um, and again, that scene was pretty much line for line in the front page, except the tete-a-tete, the chess maneuvers where Walter just tried to poison Hildy. He's like, "Hey, congrats, you're getting married. Let's go have a drink." And he's pouring something in his drink when his back's turned, but Hildy figures out and says, "Oh, I'm going to go to the bathroom," climbs out the window. And I'm like, he calls him and says, "I knew you were trying to slip me a Mickey or whatever it was at the time." Where I'm like, that's not clever. That's just merely that's again criminal. Which again, Cary Grant has Diamond Louis plant the watch, then they bribe cops to say to put him in jail. It's light corruption, but in the front page, it's much more physical violence and threats and intimidation. It's not a brilliant strategist at work.
Yes.
But I will say this part's is seminal too because she blew up at him, did the same speech as Hildy did in the front page, but she was crying, rips the phone out, can't find the arm on her coat, and is about to leave until the story of the century drops in her lap.
Yeah,
And
and
so this
she is that reporter, and so in a certain sense he's been right this whole time that she can't leave it leave well enough alone. And that does tell us something about their relationship that he knows that and Ralph Bellamy doesn't.
yeah,
Like
Ralph
ultimately,
Belly's not her equal.
yeah. Whereas the wife in the front page is just kind of she just sort of represents, domesticity or something. Um,
Yeah, and it's not a good depiction of women in that one. She's like, "Oh, what are you doing? Going back to your job?" And she's kind of harping on him in a
right.
non-sympathetic way. And you're like, "Okay, I don't know that I'm rooting for him to leave either."
um, this is about as much action as we get in this play.
I will say
I
there's a pretty
Go ahead.
good stunt with her running between. I don't know if this is a long lens on a rack focus that is making the depth of field shallower, or bringing the cops cars in. But I'm
Oh,
like,
I'm certain it's a long
she had
lens.
40 yards between those. But
Yeah, yeah. But
also a pretty
even
good
though
40s chase
even that
scene right
aside,
here in heels. And I like this cut. And sorry, one more leap. But that's what
even
kind
that
of dame
aside,
she is running in heels
those
and tackling cops.
those kind of camera angle tricks, stuff can still go wrong, and it
Yeah,
was still Rosalind Russell and not a
yeah,
stunt woman. Like there's still she has to have, and this is a real thing on real sets. And earlier films maybe were a little bit less like rigorous with their safety, but they're starting to get a little like more careful about not killing people in this. But like she still had to have absolute trust in those
yeah,
drivers and the motorcycle guys, and they had to know like if she tripped in those heels, like I had to be prepared for it. Like there's a
yeah,
lot that could go wrong, and everybody still has to be like very, very careful. And
yeah,
it's things look easy when you watch the movie, and even if you sort of intellectually know how it works, things can still go wrong. Like there was a great moment on a movie that I worked on a long time ago. I was just a PA. I didn't like know anything about anything, right? They were doing a stunt where a truck hit a ramp. It was hitting a bush, but like there was a ramp behind it, so the truck would sort of fly through the air and land on its side. And we had like three camera guys on it from different angles. And then behind each camera guy was a stuntman just standing there. And I asked the stunt coordinator, I was like, "What are they for?" And he said, "Well, if the truck goes the wrong way or goes too far or whatever, they can pull the camera guy out of the way." And I was like, "I don't understand. Like the camera guy is literally looking at it. Like, won't he just get out of the way?" And I was
yeah,
like, "No, no, the camera guys are focused on the shot, and they won't think about the safety. You need a separate human being to look over their safety, and
yeah,
their only concern is the safety and not the
yeah,
shot." And then the truck hit the ramp, flipped over, went too far, and headed straight for one of the cameras. Stuntman yanks the camera guy out of the way, and it plows over the camera, destroying it. The stunt coordinator turns to me and he goes, like it was my fault.
You jinxed it. I thought he was going to see. That's why we're professionals. And
No,
yet
no, he was
you,
like, "I can't believe you did that." Now, but he was at like it completely illustrated what the point was. Like
yeah,
that stuntman saved the cameraman's life because the cameraman would not have gotten out of the way in
yeah,
time, and because it would have, you're looking through a lens and it distorts your view of things, and you're just sort of everything sort of is mediated and not like real. So like it was absolutely necessary to take these precautions that you don't necessarily realize are important
yeah,
unless you're somebody who's been around and has done a lot of different things and knows what happens. So now I know every time I see a stunt, that's why there's an extra guy. Like that's why you need an extra person making sure that nothing goes wrong. And these things don't seem to the audience and to like novices, they don't seem like big deals, and they actually
yeah,
can be if something happens. So
yeah.
yeah, that's just sort of a tangent of like set safety,
No,
but I
there's an
think it
entire
yeah.
history. And again, you were saying the limited action this movie has. There's not small, like people could die in a lot of these things. So agreed that I don't want to run in hills and tackle someone on concrete right now. So, but I think that, yeah, I had worked on a movie where the stunt was that they needed a flare to fire around someone's feet on a boat. And
uh
they had the stuntman in a asbestos pants aside from the cowboy boots that the character had, and goggles and everything like that, and their job was just to move their feet while they fired. They used a model rocket engine that my kids launch, just a small one inside like a Nerf dart. And of
really
course they're like, all right, they fire it around, and of course he puts his foot down and it hits his boot and then comes up and then pushed the goggles out of the way and burned him from his chin to
Oh
here
gosh.
with sulfur. And again, his eye temporarily blinded, but they're like,
Oh wow.
okay, let's send him to the hospital. And then the same stuntman came out. He's like, no, I can see. A day later or two, he did another stunt that would just involve driving a car and then like roll, stopping in a tailspin on dirt and then rolling out of the door or something like that. And they're like, all right, just come to a complete stop and then you just have to roll because someone's shooting at you. And like his thumb got caught in the door and it ripped his thumbnail off. And they're like, you might not have the luck you need to be a stunt man. And again, I think he was just supposed to walk up to an edge and like look over because maybe somebody else's car had gone off. And he tripped and they had to like catch him before he fell over. It was just walking up to the edge on like Red Rock Desert in Nevada with like, wasn't a big cliff, but they're like, guy, I don't know if this is going to work out.
Did you have
But
like Mr. Bean as a stuntman?
apparently, again, very nice man and very professional stunt coordinator, everyone to try and keep them safe. But small things of walk up, there's a big rock cliff that, we were car chasing, a car went over it. You go look, but we're not going to have the main character, the actor do it. So it's all right. That was also
That's right.
a tangent.
I
But
like
yes,
this scene here, where she's on the phone and she's bouncing around with phones and stuff. A lot of times you'll see people today talk about how cell phones like solve too many problems in the plots, and they try and find an excuse to not have a cell phone,
yeah,
like the bad reception or whatever.
yeah,
But
we're in the cabin in the woods.
yeah, but the thing is, at this time, a telephone at all was an advance to be able to have multiple telephones in the same room and all of that stuff was not common. And so like they could have said, oh, you have to send a telegram and the phones are out. But they found a creative way to use telephones as a relatively new invention and had some fun with it where she's answering one phone, going to the other, and all of that stuff.
Yeah,
And I think the modern equivalent, we rather than my phone doesn't have reception, I think it's much more interesting when somebody finds ways to use the cell phone. Um, that like, okay, this exists in reality. How
yeah.
can we use this in our story? How can we
Well,
make this
especially
tech
like we
thing?
said, the fact that this is so much about people talking over each other, and you mentioned they managed to pack a whole subplot in without changing the runtime of the movies because they're talking so much. Having many phones, is reflective of that visually and allows for pattern to continue with characters that aren't even in the room.
Right.
But I will say we've mentioned the bubbling sheriff, now the mayor, looks evil and conniving, like C. Montgomery Burns. I did, when watching this, go, oh, Walter Burns, the front page one, they call him Mr. Burns, not Walter, a lot. I'm like, oh, like C. Montgomery Burns? But no, again, The Simpsons, clearly it was the street name and things from where Matt Groening grew up. But still, the governor here definitely calls to mind a visual. Oh, no, he's the mayor of Chicago. And again,
Right, right. Yeah, the governor is never seen. He's
right,
fishing somewhere, and they're trying to track him down.
right.
Um, but yeah,
These are
it's
both, we talked about how corrupt everyone is at this point. So the mayor's here and again, applying pressure. And we were saying early on that he was pushing for the execution anyway, because the election is coming up and he wants to curry favor with the black vote. And it was a colored police officer who was shot. So he has to make sure this man hangs to show he's strong on crime and win the election. So that's part of the, again, main driving plot. And we saw Walter trying to get a stay of execution. We're like, oh, good, he's trying to save the guy, or she's writing sympathetic stories. But like you said, there's no like objective, altruism to, oh, he's a cop killer, we should execute him, versus, oh, we shouldn't be killing people. The death penalty is wrong. He's just trying to win an election. They're just trying to sell papers. They're all in it for themselves and the monetary. And it's, again,
it's not really clear to me why it's a better selling angle to not for the execution to not happen. I don't understand why. There's certain political assumptions that I don't really get. Like there's a certain point where they say we're a Democrat paper, not a Republican paper.
Yeah, and yet the governor, in the beginning, he says, tell the governor if he does a stay of execution, we'll back him.
Right,
and
right,
he says,
right.
We've been a Democratic paper forever. So apparently the governor's Republican, yet he's calling for a stay of execution now. And again, so it's
Yeah, so
they
I don't
don't
I
delve into politics so much as they say, hey, our readers or our voice as a paper is sympathy. And that's actually one thing that going back to Ben Hecht, uh, people have said that his writing as a journalist was part of the new modern American journalism that looked at the working class people in Chicago when there was things like poverty and crime, and he would write uh, about their lives, about the struggles they were going through, and the pathos of these people who were just poor or a mechanic, and that's what brought through a lot of the heart and humanity for average Americans into journalism. And again, so I think his style, again, projecting it onto Walter's paper, could be we see Rosalind Russell saying, "Oh, he was in the park. He lost his job. He listened to the people talking there, and he got caught up in it. Then he shot this cop." There's a big leap there, but she's trying to paint him as a human being. And again, with the idea, it seems from Walter's angle that sells papers, that they're tapping into that core emotion for readers, and so it's good for them if he gets a stay of execution because again, I guess it wins out, heart wins out, and that's their angle.
Yeah. It doesn't seem to be related to anything that's specifically happening. It's yeah, it seems to be just sort of a generic sense of sympathy. Um and I don't and so I think there are built-in assumptions that we don't have, um that we don't understand what it means when he says we're a Democrat paper, he's a Republican governor. Like I don't think it's actually very obvious to us. I think there's a lot of assumptions in those politics of the 1940s that we're not like getting, and that but it's
Yeah,
so baked in. There's no exposition about it in the film,
yeah.
which I think
I
doesn't
think
hurt it because you
no.
still sort of understand the goals.
Yeah,
I think the underlying politics are lost though on us because we just
I
don't
would
have the same
no.
assumptions.
I would say they're smart to not delve into it because you're going to alienate 50% of your audience. Of hey, the Republican governor's the villain. Um, there's everyone has their own angle in this, and again, they don't delve into the politics. I will also say they don't delve into uh, they don't delve into kind of the element of the crime. Like I said,
Yeah, like
he we
we don't
he's a
even
cop
really
killer.
know. Yeah, like it's never really. So he talks to the psychiatrist. So the psychiatrist pushes him one way, Hildy pushes him another way. Like it's not even really clear exactly why he shot the guy. I mean, honestly, it's not even certain that he shot the guy. And like, is it, so it is partially the race is important because of the black vote, but partially, like, we don't know why he shot the guy. Like, was it a racial thing that he shot the guy? Like, it's so weird. Like, none of it.
That's
Um,
part of they
there's the
don't delve into the crime the similar way they don't delve into the politics. But
yeah,
I,
yeah,
he as much as they're trying to say, oh, he's not crazy. In these scenes, he definitely seems unsettled. But he also says they haven't been letting me sleep. They kept me up all night asking me the same question with a floodlight in his face. You're like, okay, they're torturing him.
right,
I don't know that I'd be mentally sound either. So it it's kind of
yeah,
again cast doubt on the whole process of convicting someone the death penalty and mental stability.
yeah. It's not clear if is he not intelligent? Like, is he sort of lower intelligence and doesn't even realize that he committed the crime? Does he was there intention behind the crime? And then also, like, why did the Republican governor stay his execution? Like, we understand why the mayor wants to execute the guy because it's a law and order, campaign or whatever. But why was the governor pardoning the guy? What did the guy do to deserve a pardon?
All we've
None
heard
of
about the
this is
governor is how
clear.
much he's fishing and hunting. And then
Right.
again, it seems like towards the end, he wants to get rid of the mayor and the sheriff. So he's whatever they want, he's doing the opposite, I feel like, by this point. But yeah, I will say he's, again, a lot of things are happening in that now. Earl has climbed in the window of the press room, and again, she was trying to leave. Diamond Louis came in and again gave her the money that she had to use to bribe the cop to get the exclusive story that the sheriff is the one that handed him the gun, well, to recreate the crime. So he's again completely idiotic and bumbling, and he allowed him to get away. But I think that all that kind of comes to a head. This becomes a very much parlor film, like, in plays where people running in, people running out of the same room, saying that often a criminal hiding behind the couch or an ex-lover, and they just people going in one door, out the other in this scene through the rest of the film.
Yeah, which you also wouldn't expect to happen in a room with one door, and yet they have people coming in through the window and stuff.
Yeah,
it's part of the creativity and like the fun of it is seeing that sort of thing happen. So I would pause for a second while they're running around with this farce. Apparently, we've been kicked off YouTube for copyright. Despite this being a public domain movie, our this is being recorded and we can re-upload this later, I assume.
yeah.
Okay. Well, so like this seems thing. So the modern problems that they did not have in the 1940s, the YouTube looks for there's a software algorithm thing that looks for copyrighted material, and but the software doesn't actually know if something is genuinely copyrighted, like it's not a lawyer. And so somehow somebody flagged this, which should not have happened. And
again, it's
we've been
copyright free.
pulled off
It's in the name.
Yeah, and we've been pulled off the live stream. We're not able to argue with it during the live stream. But what I can do is I'll re-upload it later in the day, and the copyright thing will come down again, and I will dispute it, saying this is a famously public domain movie, so clearly it's okay. And then they will approve it. And this happens to me almost every time.
Other movies, they're going to say, "Oh no, yeah, content was mentioned that can't say Pepsi Cola because it's copyright."
Yeah, no, that particular example is not good because that's not how that. No, they look for the same kind of footage, which is why actually we have like the movie theater background and stuff, hoping that the algorithm will be confused, but apparently it didn't work in this case. It's really inconvenient and also kind of stupid, and I can believe it. It's just annoying that it works that way. Interestingly, when it comes to showing stuff in a movie, it's actually been ruled that it's okay to show products because essentially what the I think it was, I don't know if it went to the Supreme Court, it might have just been a Ninth Circuit, West Coast decision that was never like challenged. But essentially what the judge said was if people in movies can't drive a car without paying for the car company paying to see their trademark and stuff, like at that point, like it's impossible to make a movie if they can't drink something out of a cup, if they can't use a cell phone eventually. What the judge said was as long as they're using the product the way it was intended. So if somebody is hanging out and drinking with their friends, you can kind of do whatever. If somebody is getting drunk and drunk driving, then Budweiser or whoever could sue you for or the car company, I think also in that case could have a problem. But the main reason why you don't see trademark stuff in movies and television is the studios realize this is valuable advertising and you have to pay us. So we're not going to put it in there unless you pay us. So if my character is going to be drinking a Pepsi needs to give me, 10 grand or whatever. And that,
lowballing it. Go higher. They got
it depends on the movie, obviously.
Well,
half of the James Bond movies are paid for by product placement.
Oh yeah,
like the watches and the cars and all.
For some reason,
I've been seeing trailers for Wicked with a car company. Like, how is a car sponsoring Wicked?
They drive on a big train, we see. I will say also, again, you were discussing how the movie companies are like, hey, how can we make money out of this? We were discussing everyone having an angle in this movie and being out for themselves. We just saw Hildy being outed that she knows where Earl is, all of the press guys turn on her, are physically grabbing her, saying, "You're trying to scoop us? Where's she at? Or where's he at?" And they are, again, she seems physically a threat to the point where Molly's like, "Leave her alone," throws herself out the window to try and save her or distract them. And because, again, she's been harassed so much by these press guys that her mental state is in question. But here's the part where, again, this takes a darker turn. A, the suicide attempt, the press devouring one of their own. And then B, Walter is now restraining her, bending her wrist, and just had Louis kidnap her future mother-in-law. And again, up till now, he's been like, "Oh, I'll bribe a policeman. Oh, I'll plant a fake watch on the guy and have him arrested just to get out of my way." He just had an old lady abducted by a criminal because he doesn't want her talking, and he shoved a handkerchief in her mouth. And now, again, physically intimidating his ex-wife and employee over the importance of this story, which we, again, said because it'll sell papers, not because he believes someone's life is on the line. So this is the part where I start to go, "Oh, wait, I don't think I like this guy."
It does. So this is the sort of, I think, the double standards that we all sort of live with and have in us. When they switched Hildy to a woman, in certain elements, it made the movie better. It made it like there's the extra layer of the romance and all of that stuff. And they did extra clever things, like you said. Instead of the poisoning, there was the check and stuff. But then you have to be very, very careful about Cary Grant, who's, he's got like 6 inches on her and probably, 50 pounds. And like, you can't get too much of him trying to intimidate her without it being uncomfortable, even in those days. And the little guy, kidnapping the woman, I think maybe there was a little bit of like, it's funny because that might be why they made him so much smaller. He's not a little person, but he's a little person.
For being a street tough, he is not physically intimidating. But
I think part of why they did that was to soften that, because they knew that was going to happen, and even at the time, people would have been uncomfortable with kidnapping an old lady and stuff.
Right.
And so it's a little bit like, is this a cartoon? How serious do we take this? How much of a Looney Tunes cartoon is this? Yeah. And I don't think it's improper to say that's crosses the line. But I think they did have it in their head. I think they were like trying to find a balance, and maybe it was a mistake, but I think it was at least there.
I will say he talks her back in. She comes back around here where he starts saying, "Are you kidding me? This is the biggest story of the century, and you fell right in your lap. It's as big as when Livingston met Stanley." And she's like, "Stop that and reverse it," because he got the facts wrong about the historic meeting. And so she engages her mind, and now she's fully back in, and Ralph Bellamy's back in, and this part is very important because she says, "No, I've got to get this story. Are you kidding me? I'm gonna be the biggest star ever." And he's like, "We have to go. Where's my mother?" And she says the line, "Stop bugging me. I'm a newspaper man."
Yeah.
And she's now going along with not telling him that his mother's been kidnapped. And I will also say, Abner Biberman plays Louis. He's very much in the Peter Lorre. It was the classic Maltese Falcon of a Eastern European, ne'er-do-well, somewhat criminal, but they're not big and physically intimidating, but there's something there, you're sure they have a switchblade or something that they're good with. And so,
oh yeah, he could play a serious bad guy, and they don't play up that angle in this one. Right. Like they're trying to sort of, and I think that's just sort of a balance of how seriously you take that fact, because it's also like, on the flip side, he winds up with Ralph Bellamy winds up with the prostitute, and there's no sort of explanation of any of that. It's just like he's with a blonde lady in a short dress.
Oh no, they have Diamond Louie. She asks, "Hey, you set him up with that albino." Again, he says they picked me up for it's called mashing. So for groping a woman. So she did the same thing as Diamond Louie did with the watch, where she just walked in front of him with a cop that they're paying and going, "He just grabbed me." And so he was run down to the station on fake charges. But it's all just to get him out of the way, which Walter was doing, but now she wants as well. Um,
Wait,
but yeah,
I misunderstood that. I thought he was being grabbed for soliciting a prostitute. I thought they knew she was a prostitute. Was she claiming to be did I misunderstand that? I always
I'll
thought he
look
was
up.
being accused of hiring a prostitute and that she was
No, I
knowing the
think
prostitute.
slang in the time being a masher meant pervert, someone who grabs, gropes, or physically intimidates women.
Oh, see, I
So
thought it was
she's an
like
upstanding lady walking on the street, and then she says, "This man just groped me."
I thought
Um,
mashing was like kissing and stuff, and I thought that what the problem
Either
was that they were being
in public,
publicly overly
indecent.
affectionate and that they both were getting grabbed or arrested rather.
No,
I misunderstood that. I don't think I
again,
ever
old timey
they don't
language,
show
but
you because it's the movie is obviously the movie's about Hildy, and so like it's kind of irrelevant. The point is that he got arrested, and yeah, so like
yeah.
it's like the politics. It's like I
No,
think
well, I'd
maybe
say,
there are little shades of things that we're missing at just
yeah,
being in the modern era, and it's okay. Like you don't
yes, the relationship dynamic in 1940 definitely different than now. But I would say that yeah, she is now again in her lane and doing like a duck in water, her journalism that's in her blood. And again, she just asked, "Where's Bruce?" He's like, "Oh, he left." She's in the heat of battle, getting blinders on and being like, "Oh," and then she later remembers. But
yeah.
that's the part that again brings her up to his level of she's willing to do certain things, including lie to Bruce about where his mother went, because the story is so big. And so she's again, there's blood in the water, and she's going for it. And that's what again, as much as I said, oh, I just like Walter with the mother-in-law scene, her rising up to it is like, well, they're suited for each other. And so she comes back around, kind of makes me come back around towards him, and him dismissing Bruce and being in line with her. She's the main one trying to get him out of the way. So now you're like, all right, I'm rooting for them together, maybe because of this.
Yeah. But also like ultimately again it's not as far as Breaking Bad or something, but like ultimately they're not great people, neither
Oh,
of
right.
them, and you probably wouldn't want to have them over for dinner, but they are fun to watch on in a movie. But you
Right.
don't it is sad. And going back to Hecht and stuff, like it is a very cynical view of the press generally that
Yeah.
sometimes a lot or not sometimes a lot of times in modern parlance we talk about the press being biased, politically one way or another, but Hecht doesn't even think it's that. Hecht is just like they literally don't care about the truth. They're just trying to sell papers,
Right.
which I don't know if that's even better or worse.
Right.
Like,
Uh,
but it's like
they're just doing it for
it's
the
something.
clicks. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I will say
It,
this
would you
embodiment,
rather
them,
they do it for the clicks or would you rather they do it
they
for
believe in the
political?
terrible things.
I don't
No,
know.
the journalist Benzinger that he just came in, she's like, "Hey, his name's this," and he's like, "Oh, I'll hire you on my staff. Go over to my building right now, and we'll double your pay what you're getting over at the Tribune." And he's like, "All right, I do poetry as part of my thing." And again, in the front page, the character's a bit different, and
Oh, is it?
he's a germaphobe. And well, again, I think it's
Oh,
very
yeah, yeah.
similar of like there's types of press. Some of them are highly educated and look down their nose and use a bunch of rhyming scheme and stuff, as opposed to knowing the heart of the story and going with their gut. And so they were just mocking a different type of press, and it's consistent in the other version of the film. Um, but again, we see Walter dealing with it, telling him he's going to give him a job, and then he tells his editor, he's like, run him around for an hour or two, then kick him out on the street.
That's almost like one of the worst to me. That's like one of the worst things that he does in this movie because that poor guy like thought he had a job. Like he had
Well,
a
again,
decent job at the other
he
paper.
didn't. He said, "Oh, he's it serves him right for turning his back on his current paper so easily." And again, we didn't see him like make him call and quit his other paper, so we'll see. But again,
I
this
mean,
part,
double your pay. I mean, I don't know who like has that much
right,
loyalty to their employer that someone offering double the pay. Like if I was the employer, I'd be like, nah, you got to take it.
I agree. But I will say also this part with Louis, he was driving away with the old lady and runs into a police car that was driving down the wrong way. So he has no idea if the woman's alive or dead. He ran because, wait,
Because he's got an open warrant now.
that's his right. And that's Walter's replies. Oh, she might be dead.
But again, though, like they also try to make a point. Like part of the comedy is he kind of got beaten up too, and like he
Right.
looks like he got what's coming to him, and she is okay in the end. And so like there's they try to make sure that none of it is
Again,
too
it's
serious.
right. It's a
Yeah,
bit toothless. They pull punches from the blood part,
yeah.
But
But
agreed
it,
that it
if they had shown actual consequence, like she had died
yeah,
in the car accident or whatever, or if he had legitimately abused her, like there's so many ways you could have done this way worse. And it's smart that they didn't because it allows the movie to be fun.
yeah,
Because if you take it, if they tried to put too much, it allows them to sort of play both sides because they're a little bit cynical while at the same time not like ruining the fun of the thing.
yeah.
And so for the most part, and I agree with you. I think the stuff with the mother maybe goes a little too far, but for the most part, they actually found a really good balance, which is why I think the movie still sort of
Right. It
uh,
rides that
retains
line,
it, retains
goes
the
up to
quality.
the edge, and then pulls back. And agreed that
Yeah,
that's what.
yeah, and maybe
Uh,
even slightly too far, and then comes
yeah,
back. And so if it were to make somebody uncomfortable or something, I wouldn't even like blame them. I don't think they would be being overly sensitive, but also it's there's not many people that would apply to. I think in the case of this, as opposed to I can't think of an example right now, but you can imagine a movie that actually does is flippant and makes fun of victims and stuff, and that's not
right.
really what they're doing here. And I think they're very close, and I think that's why I think lots of people like this movie. Everybody can sort of have a little fun with the cynicism of it
Yeah,
without getting too like down on it.
yeah. No, and at this point, again, it's amps the drama and a lot of the physicality of this because they're trying to smuggle Earl out by keeping him in the desk. But again, now the press are back off of Molly Malloy's suicide. I think she survives, and the sheriff is now involved as well. Oh, here it comes. There's a meme.
Here's the meme. We're gonna do the thing.
Let go
Can
of
you
me.
turn up the
Hang on,
volume?
Oh, please, look, fella, something's happened to my mother-in-law.
We know what's
Keep her
up here, Ellie.
Maybe going out to get Williams. You had the door
She
locked.
and Molly were in here talking.
I know where he is.
Oh,
Oh,
look,
okay.
I don't know anything, really, and there's been an accident.
Johnson, there's something very, very peculiar
Don't
going
wanna,
on
like,
here.
step
Now,
on
see
it.
here,
Yeah.
Johnson.
Just a moment, Hartwell. If you have any accusations to make them in the proper manner. Otherwise, I'll have to ask you to get out.
You'll ask me to what?
Get out.
Oh, you will, eh?
I
You
do
keep that door
wonder
closed and don't let anybody
about
let her out. Now, we'll see about
meme culture. Like Cary Grant is recognizable, and that like gesture and having the subtitle saying "Get out" is useful in a lot of contexts. But like, how does somebody find a movie from 1940? Like, how did that GIF come to be in the first place? Not GIF,
Yeah,
GIF. How did that GIF come to being in the first place? How did somebody decide I want to tell somebody to get out? I need to dig up my old His Girl Friday DVD and
no, yeah,
clip that fraction of a second and then post it. Like it is curious how those when it happens to a modern movie, I totally understand why Leonardo DiCaprio whistling and pointing at the camera. I can see why
right.
somebody immediately pulls
Often.
that out and uses it
Yeah.
somewhere. But going back and digging up an old movie, I don't know how that
I,
occurs to anybody the first time.
I feel like there's enough tags and things and ingestion of at some point someone was putting the movie on the internet or a database or somewhere. And again, my wife's an assistant editor, so she ends up doing a lot of like dialogue breakdowns and things that are here's a searchable format for the entire what ended up being the production film of all the lines, all the things to make it searchable for editors and things. So at the point where now I look for gifts in Slack or somewhere and just write get out and it brings up 40 of those. I'm like, maybe someone at some point in archiving history moved movies over and tagged them with whatever the word is, such to the point where all it took was the internet part to go, oh, I searched Get Out and this clip came up. I'm gonna meme it, and then it catches fire. And the rest is history. And then people who memed it are rich and famous, and that's how the world is.
It is actually what you're describing has become a thing in recent years. There's a website called, I don't even know how I found this, Get Yarn, random name. I don't understand it. What it seems like what they do is they take the subtitle file and they clip shots based automatically. Like, I don't think there's a human being doing any of this, but they clip shots based on the dialogue. And if you search for the dialogue, the correct shot will pop up and it will add the text as impact fonts because we have no imagination. And it does it for for I don't know how many movies, but like I've gone in and be like, I want to express this sentiment, and I feel like I've heard this line of dialogue, and I'll just type in a line of dialogue, and I'll look until I see a show or a movie I recognize and be like,
yeah,
that's funny because I've seen that before. Like I understand that reference, which is itself a reference.
You use the Leonardo DiCaprio. Yeah, I'd say now AI can do it. We just tell it any movie in the world and it'll find it and clip it. But I will also say, again, the height of the chamber parlor comedy of running in and out has there's a plot point where Walter tells Earl that, oh, only open up for me, I'll knock on it 3 times. And he's defending himself against the old lady's accusations and he bangs his fist on the desk 3 times. I'm like, that's a little convenient of a plot device that he then knocks back and spoils that he's in there.
Wait, isn't Cary Grant doing it on purpose?
No, he's just, I'm like, why he's about to, the plot right before that is, he's saying, you can't kick me out of here, I'll have you arrested. He's like, you will get out of here and take all your stuff. He's like, this desk is property of the Post. If you're kicking me out, you'd have to get this desk out. He's about to have the cops lift the desk with Earl out, and he's going to win and make the idiot sheriff hand him the killer and the story of the year, but he accidentally pounds on the desk 3 times.
I always interpreted that as he's playing a con and that he's purposefully doing it so that they'll find him. Like to me, this is all part of his plan. Maybe I've misunderstood because it's so stupid.
Again,
he couldn't have accidentally done it.
I don't see him being able to foresee the only thing that saves him. Right now, they're in hot water and there's no escape out. And the only thing that comes in is the governor's cousin, which is...
Yeah, but look at how confident they are. They're confident that something is going to happen.
Gotta fake it till you make it.
Yeah, to me, that's what it was the whole time. Like, I always am like, he's got it up his sleeve. Like, he's not gonna...
The mayor just said whistling in the dark, or again, whistling past the graveyard. It's you're bluffing at a time where you are the most afraid.
Yeah, but the mayor is wrong. That's how I always read it.
He's right for now, and a Deus Ex Machina walks in at the exact given time. I will also say the problem I have with this part is all the rest of the press runs out to go with Earl and to start writing their stories and everything like that.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of like we got to get to where we're.
Well, no, I'd say that he then opens the phone, and right then the governor's cousin comes and says, "Oh, about that reprieve," and that's when the dynamic shifts, and they go, "Oh, you guys are screwed because you suppressed this. You're trying to bribe this guy. There are no witnesses right now. If there was at least one other press person here, but I'm like, you're corrupt enough that you're gonna frame or do things, and yet you're not gonna just hush this up, make it disappear right now." I get that the governor's cousin is probably someone they can't just shoot and dump in a river, but still, if the phone were still off the hook, if Cary Grant had surreptitiously lifted the handle, and if Dixon, or I forget his editors, was out the other end capturing all this, and it went out in the evening post, or again, it's 5 a.m. and they're like, "Hey, we just made press time of this story," but
there is an element of a lot of mystery stories where when the protagonist solves the issue, the criminal just gives up and doesn't try to get away.
Yeah, the Scooby-Doo mask is off, and
and even though I mean, there is the cop in the background, so there's the question of like precisely how corrupt is this cop? Like,
again, they didn't say specifically they call out Chicago. I will also say that the mayor instantly turns to say, Sheriff, how could you have bungled this so badly? And
Right.
so he's already throwing someone else under the bus and being like, oh, it wasn't me.
Yeah, I mean, like they couldn't threaten. I mean, the governor, the guy's the governor's cousin. One guy's the publisher of a major paper, and there's a major reporter. Like to get all three of them to disappear. Like I think it would be. I think it would just be. I think
Yeah,
it,
there's
I
the
think
line
they're
we were
just saying
talking
it's
about,
just
like-
too much.
Right.
Yeah.
Similar to crossing the line with the mother-in-law dying. They go right up to so you don't want to just shoot these people and cover it all up. They're like,
Yeah.
God, no, how base do you think we are? I'm like, okay, I was just checking. You're right at that line. It's one more step.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it could sort of go either way, but it's also some of it is just like the movie's done. Like
Right.
we understand how they've gotten it, and like you just want to wrap it up and get out as quickly as possible.
And
Um,
the good guys won.
Yeah. Now, so this is something we discussed before the start of the show, but like this scene is very important because he's pretending that he's going to let her go. My interpretation is that she has been getting caught up in reporting on the story this whole time, and she was not trying to get him back. She was
Right.
trying to report on the story and
Right.
remembering that she loved him, but not she wasn't playing an angle. Her plan was to write the story, and then when she would sort of come back to herself, she would go off with Ralph Bellamy. But also this whole time it's reminded her of why she was attracted and why
Right.
she married Cary Grant in the first
This
place.
last 10 minutes
But I don't
was
think she was trying to trick him here.
true. I agree that she didn't set up the engagement as a trap. But and again, she told herself she wanted a quiet life with Bruce and to go raise kids. And she tells that to the other journalists and saying, I'm going to be a mother. I'm not going to have to eat terrible food and crouch on fire escapes in the winter. But this last 20 minutes of seeing him at his prime and her participating, her heart racing and everything. And that's what I think she can't walk away. And he's saying, no, go to Bruce. And she's realizing that at its height with him and the news game, the life with Bruce would not measure up. So I do believe that she's come around to that, but he's letting her go. But again, the question is, does he really think she's walking out that door right now?
Well, I mean,
He's being cold. He's almost throwing rocks at a puppy that he wants to go away. Like,
I mean, he's almost doing that thing, the advice that people are given to let them go, and if they come back, it was meant to be. Like I don't know if he knows whether she'll leave or not. And I think that's kind of why there's suspense in this scene is we're not sure if we're not sure if this plan will work.
right.
We don't know if she's going to go off and become a wife and mother and stuff.
I think
So this scene where she cries and stuff, like I actually feel like it's one of the more realistic moments in the like. I don't want to I don't want to say, but it seems like something I've seen before in real life. And like this is a real reaction that she thought he was going to do something, that he was going to let her go, and she didn't want him to let her go, and that hurt her that he was going to let her go. And that the crying is actually relief that he's not. And that's
okay. So
that
the
I feel like I've
counterfeit
seen.
money, the counterfeit money proves to her that he had a third trick up his sleeve of getting her fiance arrested, so
Right.
that she wouldn't actually leave. There was a safety net. He's like, no, go jump off if you want. And she's like, you did have a safety net there. You always wanted to catch me. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And so she's relieved that he had another pawn
Backup.
going.
To keep her around. Okay.
Yeah.
I will say the relief angle I could see on medium watchings, I had seen it and gone, oh, are they breaking her down at the end of she's now like, let's get remarried and go to Niagara Falls, and she's just falling for the Stockholm syndrome or whatever of his abuse, because he's even like, yeah, we'll go to Niagara Falls. Oh, wait, we have to stop by Albany which is Bruce's hometown. So it's the perfect thumb in the eye. But
Yeah,
I'm like, she's kind of a here we go again, and it's a whimsical like this pattern will continue. But I'm like, is it a healthy one relationship for her and even for him? But
I do think that and the problem I have with it is the Albany thing. Like they nobody has any character growth at all. Like he is he sort of goes out and then circles back around to where he was at the beginning of the movie. And romantically, I wish he had changed a little bit. Like, I wish he had said no or something. Um, or that she had pushed back and said, "Listen, you said this last time. We're not going to
yeah,
Albany." Like, if there had
she
been
could have
something
dictated
else,
the terms and or taken the phone and said, "Fine, we're stopping by that strike, but you're doing this again." Agreed. That would
yeah,
have shown, given me hope that this time might be different for their marriage.
yeah, and it would have. It's kind of. I think they were kind of going for a joke, and I think the joke is not funny enough to justify how. Again, I don't want to say abusive, but like how
Unhealthy
cyclical
their
this.
relationship.
Yeah, and it would have been better if either she had sort of had some pushback or if he had a slight change of heart or something. And I think that would have been a like honestly when they cry and she says we can go on a real honeymoon and he says yes, like if it's like got there, like I would be fine with it. And it would have been a little bit better, I think.
Nope.
And it's but it's not it doesn't ruin the movie for me.
No,
It
I
just
think
it ends on a slightly like the other sort of cynicism. I guess maybe it's just like I'm fine with being cynical about the press and about politicians. I don't want to be cynical about marriage. Maybe that's what it
or
is.
again, romance in general, if he's
Yeah,
got an
like
angle. So
yeah, like I would just rather
you're a
I would
romantic.
rather like the romantic relationship is okay regardless of how the press are the enemy of the people and politicians are lizard people. Like but I want true love to exist even in all of that, you know?
Yeah.
Um
I think it does at least get they've got broken pieces, but they fit together well,
yeah, yeah.
So these two are made for each other. Whether they'll go through that same cycle and divorce again, but then he'll just have to come up with new schemes and it'll
Yeah.
repeat for eternity in our minds.
She deserves a honeymoon is all that I'm
It's
saying.
true.
Even if they pay for it with counterfeit money.
Exactly.
All right.
But that's
So, but yeah, it's
end
good.
of the movie.
I'm glad we watched this again. This is it's such a good movie. And again, we talked over the whole thing. So if you did, if someone sat through this whole thing not having seen the movie before, we've ruined it for you. You need to go and actually watch the movie for real. Because it's so funny. There's so many great lines. There's so many classic moments. There's the meme, of course, but like that's not even like the most important thing. The pattern between them, the romance between them. There's it's so well done, and I think and we're lucky, honestly, that this became a public domain film that we can watch, even though YouTube hit our channel. I'm going to push back on that because that's stupid. Um, I I'm glad that there's an accident of history that made this movie stand
Accessible.
out. Whereas I think there's other classic movies or movies that we're told are classics that we're supposed to watch that we sort of like homework and it's sort of drudgery, and we're like, oh, I gotta, I have to watch. Honestly, I don't like Vertigo. You brought it up earlier. I don't like Vertigo.
Oh, all right.
It's just it's not my.
I
I find
like
it.
watching it for again. Oh, look at that staging. Look at the entire set is
Yeah,
constructed towards this, which again he does in better even in other films. But I will say that yeah, agreed that the ghost dream dynamic, and they're like, oh, this is just a believable plot point. This is explained to a detective, and he believes it. I'm like, what?
yeah.
No. So I agree that
His
it's
Girl
of
Friday
the
is just
time and place.
His Girl Friday is a movie I think honestly, genuinely anyone can enjoy. Like
Yep.
I think if you as long as you don't have some bias against black and white, like it, I think almost anybody could like this movie.
Yeah, and I think again it holds up well, even as much as we said some of the patterns, some of those
Some of
slangs
it is,
we don't know, but I think the dynamic and the characters and the relationship are what make it timeless.
yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you everyone for watching, and we'll be coming back again if YouTube doesn't kick us off sometime in
Pirate
the next
radio.
one.
They can't
Yeah.
silence us. All right.
Yeah, thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Bye.